The sound of shattering crystal tore through the marble corridor, but the scream that followed wasn't the one anyone expected. The woman bleeding on the floor wasn't the target. She was just the waitress who had stepped in the way. Trudy Mack had never been the kind of person anyone noticed walking into a room. She was 26 years old, 5'4", and carried herself with the careful, practiced smallness of someone who had spent a lifetime learning to take up as little space as possible, which was not easy when you weighed close to 270 pounds. She had a pretty face. People told her that sometimes, usually as a consolation. Big brown eyes, a wide, warm smile, cheeks that went pink in the cold. But in the circles she moved through, catering halls, hotel kitchens, corporate banquet floors, pretty faces didn't matter much. What mattered was speed, silence, and invisibility. Trudy was good at 2 out of 3. She worked for Hargrove Premier Staffing, which was a polished name for a temp agency that supplied servers, coat check attendants, and kitchen runners to high-end events across the greater Chicago area. The pay was $14 an hour, plus whatever gratuity the client saw fit to include, which was usually nothing. Trudy had been with Hargrove for 3 years. She took every shift she could get. Her mother, Bet Mack, had been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer 18 months ago, and the treatment wasn't cheap, and the insurance her mother carried through a part-time grocery store job covered just enough to make you believe it was helping before it quietly stopped. Trudy didn't complain about any of this to anyone. She just worked. The Aldrin Hotel assignment came through on a Thursday, black tie fundraiser on the 40th floor, 200 guests, a 6-course dinner service for a non-profit gala. That was what the booking paperwork said. Dress code, full-service blacks. Report to the kitchen entrance on Wabash by 5:30. Trudy showed up at 5:15. She noticed things were different the moment she stepped into the freight elevator. The other Hargrove girls were quieter than usual. The hotel's internal security, normally a bored guy in a blazer near the coat check, had been replaced by men who stood differently, still in suits, but their eyes moved in slow, measured sweeps, the way a person's eyes move when they are trained to see threats before they become problems. There were too many of them. 6 that Trudy could count from the service corridor alone. One of the senior servers, a woman named Portia who had been doing this circuit for 12 years, leaned close to Trudy while they were arranging bread plates. "Declan Muro's event," she murmured, not looking up from the linen. "Keep your head down, do your job, and don't make eye contact with anyone at the main table." Trudy had heard the name Declan Muro the way most Chicagoans had, in passing, in headlines buried on page 6. In the careful, oblique way news anchors mentioned him when they were reporting on city council corruption or the unsolved disappearance of a federal informant. He was 41 years old. He ran 3 legitimate construction firms and a private port logistics company. He donated regularly to children's hospitals and a foundation that funded after-school programs in the South Side. He was also, by every credible account, the operating head of the most sophisticated organized crime network operating between Chicago and the Eastern Seaboard. In person, he was quieter than Trudy expected. She saw him when the main course service began. He was seated at the center of the long head table, flanked by men in expensive suits who leaned in and out of his orbit like planets around a sun. Declan Muro himself sat very still. He was broad-shouldered, with dark hair going silver at the temples, and a face that was not handsome in any soft way. It was angular, considered, a face that had learned long ago not to give anything away. He spoke rarely. When he did, the people around him stopped talking immediately. Trudy stayed as far from that table as her station assignment allowed. The trouble started, as trouble often did at these events, with a woman who had decided the night belonged to her. Her name was Verity Pash. Trudy learned it later, though she did not need a name to recognize the type. Late 30s, ivory column dress, diamond earrings that caught the chandelier light from across the room. She was the fiancée of Declan Muro, which was information that circulated through the service staff within the first 20 minutes, the way all information circulates in kitchens, quietly, through the corners of mouths, between refills. Verity Pash was beautiful and knew exactly what that was worth, and had spent years collecting on it. She held court at the far end of the head table with the easy authority of someone who had already decided. She outranked everyone in the room except the man sitting 6 chairs away from her. She laughed loudly. She sent back the salmon. She snapped her fingers to flag servers, a habit so ingrained she seemed unaware she was doing it. Trudy had served women like Verity before. She kept her expression neutral and her movements efficient. It was during the dessert course that Trudy noticed the older woman had disappeared. She had seen her earlier, a small, elegant figure seated 2 chairs down from Declan, white-haired, with a deep green dress and the kind of posture that spoke of an earlier era's finishing schools. Declan had leaned over to speak to her twice during the meal, both times with a deliberateness that Trudy recognized as care, the specific care a person exercises with someone they are afraid of losing, his mother. Trudy didn't know this yet, but she felt it. The chair was empty. The napkin was still folded on the seat. Trudy set her dessert tray on a side station and slipped out of the ballroom. The hallway beyond the main doors was wide and carpeted in deep burgundy. Trudy moved quickly, checking the restroom corridor first. Empty, then the small lounge alcove near the elevators. She heard a voice before she saw anything. It was low and controlled, but there was a particular edge in it that Trudy recognized from years of overhearing things she was not supposed to hear. Cruelty kept on a leash. She rounded the corner into the alcove. The older woman, Declan's mother, though Trudy still didn't know her name, was seated on a small velvet bench near the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked confused. Not frightened yet, but close to it. Her eyes had that quality Trudy had seen in her own mother during a bad week. Present in body, but searching, reaching for something they couldn't quite hold. Verity Pash stood over her. "You are embarrassing yourself," Verity said, quietly enough that it wouldn't carry back to the ballroom. "And you are embarrassing Declan. You can't even remember where you are. Do you understand how that looks?" The older woman's chin lifted slightly. "I know exactly where I am," she said, though her voice wavered. "You called the congressman by the wrong name twice. You told the woman from the Tribune that her husband was dead. He was standing right next to her." Verity's voice was perfectly measured, which somehow made it worse. "After tonight, Declan and I are going to need to have a serious conversation about your living situation. There are very good facilities. Private ones. I've already made some inquiries." The older woman's hands began to tremble. Trudy stepped into the alcove. "Ma'am," she said, addressing Declan's mother, keeping her voice steady and warm, "I'm so sorry to interrupt. Your son has been asking for you. He's ready to begin the remarks, and he'd like you seated." It was not true, but it was the only exit she could build quickly enough. Verity turned. Her expression, when she saw Trudy, shifted through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, irritation, and then something colder and more deliberate when she took in the full picture. Trudy in her service blacks, broad-hipped and pink-faced, and visibly out of breath from moving quickly through the corridor. "No one asked for you," Verity said. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was sent to." "You were sent to serve food," Verity said. "That's the full scope of your usefulness here. So why don't you turn around, go back to the kitchen, and let the adults handle what doesn't concern you?" Trudy kept her eyes on Declan's mother. The older woman was looking at her now with something that might have been gratitude, or might have been the bewildered relief of a person who has just seen a door open in a room they thought had none. "I'll walk with you back to the ballroom," Trudy said to her gently, the way she spoke to her own mother on hard days. "Your son will want to see you." She stepped forward and offered her arm. Verity moved first. It was not a slap, not exactly. It was the gesture that precedes one, the sharp, reflexive swing of someone who has never in her adult life been physically checked and has forgotten, or perhaps never learned, that there are consequences to treating people as though they are furniture. Her palm connected with the side of Trudy's face before either of them fully understood what was happening. The sound was flat and hard in the small space of the alcove. Trudy's head jerked to the side. She felt the sting spread across her cheekbone and into her jaw. Her eyes watered involuntarily. She did not fall. She was not built for falling easily, which was the only reason she stayed on her feet. That and the fact that her arm was still linked with the older woman's, and she was not letting go. She turned her face back slowly. Verity was staring at her own hand as though it belonged to someone else. Her expression had gone very still. "Is there a problem?" The voice came from the entrance to the alcove. It was not loud. Trudy would think about that later, how it didn't need to be. It filled the space completely without volume, the way certain silences do, because of what they contain. Declan Muro stood at the mouth of the corridor. He was still in his jacket. His eyes moved once across the room. His mother, her expression, the way she was gripping Trudy's arm, and then settled on Trudy's face. The mark on her cheek was already beginning to show, a reddening that spread from her cheekbone toward her jaw. Behind Declan, two men materialized from the hallway without a sound. "Declan." Verity's voice had changed completely. It was softer now, a register Trudy had not heard her use before. "Your mother wandered off again. I was just—" "Don't!" The word was almost gentle. It was worse for being gentle. He crossed the alcove and crouched down in front of his mother, taking her hands in both of his. He spoke to her quietly, too low for Trudy to hear, and watched the older woman's expression settle by degrees. The confusion not gone, but quieted, the way a frightened animal quiets when someone it trusts comes close. His mother touched his face with one hand, said something back to him. He nodded. Then he stood and looked at Trudy. "She's all right?" he asked. Trudy understood he was asking her specifically. She had been watching his mother's face for the last several minutes in a way that no one else in this corridor had. "She's a little disoriented," Trudy said. "The noise and the lights in there would do that. If she could sit somewhere quieter for a little while, with something warm to drink, she'd feel steadier." Declan looked at her for a moment. There was something in his expression she couldn't read. Not softness, exactly. More like recognition. He turned to one of the men behind him. "Take my mother to the private lounge on 38. Stay with her." He turned to the other. "Find the event coordinator and have a car brought around for Miss Pash." Verity made a sound. "You cannot be serious." "The engagement is over," Declan said. He said it the way a person states a fact about weather. "You'll be escorted out. If you'd like to make a scene on your way through the ballroom, I would strongly advise against it. Over a waitress." The word came out with a particular precision, meant to cut. "You're ending a 4-year relationship because of some fat waitress who inserted herself into something that had nothing to do with her." Declan did not respond to this. He looked at Verity for a long, expressionless moment. Whatever she saw in his face made her stop talking. She left. Her heels were very loud going down the carpeted hallway, which somehow made the departure smaller, not larger. Declan looked back at Trudy. "You're hurt," he said. "It's fine," Trudy said. It wasn't, particularly. Her cheekbone was throbbing, and she could feel that the skin had split slightly at the outer edge, where Verity's ring had caught it. But it was not the kind of injury that warranted the attention it was receiving. "Come with me," he said. "Mr. Muro, I really should get back to. Come with me." It was not said unkindly. It was also not a request. There was a first aid kit in the hotel manager's office on the same floor, and one of Declan's people, a quiet, competent man named Aldous, who turned out to be a former army medic, cleaned and closed the cut with the kind of practiced efficiencies that suggested this was not the first time he had patched someone up in an unusual location. Trudy sat on the edge of a leather chair and stared at the abstract painting on the wall and tried very hard not to cry, which she mostly succeeded at. Declan sat across from her while Aldous worked. He did not make conversation, which Trudy found unexpectedly less uncomfortable than conversation would have been. When Aldous finished and left them, Declan said, "What's your name, Trudy?" "Trudy Mack." "How long have you worked for the staffing company?" 3 years. Before that, she blinked. Waitressing, different places, some office work. He was quiet for a moment. "Why did you go looking for her?" he asked. "My mother. You didn't have to." Trudy considered this honestly. "She reminded me of someone," she said finally. He waited. "My mum. She has cancer. When she's having a bad week, certain medications, certain days, she gets confused, looks for things that aren't there, gets turned around in familiar places." Trudy looked at her hands. "You learn to spot it, the way someone's eyes go when they're searching for something they can't find." "Your mother had that look." Declan was quiet for a long moment. "She has dementia," he said. It sounded like something he did not say often. Not something he was ashamed of, more like something he protected fiercely by keeping it contained. "Early stage. She masks it well in most situations, but large events overwhelm her. Tonight was." He stopped. "Tonight was a lot," Trudy said. Something shifted in his expression. "Not much. Enough. I'd like to offer you a position," he said. Trudy stared at him. "Not with the staffing company. Directly, my mother needs someone with her consistently. Someone who understands what she's dealing with without treating her like an obligation." He paused. "Someone she'd actually tolerate, which is not as common as you might expect. She doesn't suffer fools." "I'm a waitress," Trudy said. "You're observant, you're calm under pressure, and you understand how to handle a person in a moment of cognitive distress without making them feel reduced by it." His voice was matter of fact. "I'm not asking you to be a nurse. I'm asking you to be a companion. The pay would be considerably better than $14 an hour." Trudy opened her mouth, closed it. "I would want you to meet her first," he said, "in a normal setting. Let her decide if she's comfortable with you. She would have the final word." Trudy thought about the overnight bills stacked on the kitchen counter at home. She thought about her mother's face when the doctor used the phrase "third cycle of treatment." She thought about the way the older woman in the green dress had looked at her when she offered her arm, not with surprise exactly, but with something that felt like relief at being treated like a person. "Okay," she said. "I'll meet her." His mother's name, she learned, was Declan Muro. She was 68 years old, had been born in Milwaukee to a Polish immigrant family, had married into money and violence, and spent 40 years navigating both with remarkable composure. She was sharp-tongued, opinionated about coffee, and had strong feelings about the correct way to fold a newspaper. The dementia was not advanced, but it was progressing, and the good days and bad days had a way of arriving without warning, which made consistency the most valuable thing anyone could offer her. Declan Muro met Trudy in Declan's townhouse on a Sunday morning, 2 weeks after the gala. She was seated at a kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a crossword puzzle, and looked up when Trudy came in with the particular measuring gaze of a woman who has spent a lifetime sizing people up accurately. "You're the one who stepped in front of Verity," Annette said. "Yes, ma'am. She hit you." "She did." Annette looked at her steadily. "Does your face still hurt?" "A little. It's mostly healed." Annette made a sound that was not quite a hum and not quite a word. She looked back down at her crossword. "Sit down, then. You can have coffee if you want it. You take it black, or do you need things in it?" "Black is fine," Trudy said. "Good. Declan drinks it with cream now, which I find suspect." She wrote something in the crossword. 11 down, fierce loyalty, 7 letters. Trudy sat. "Fidelis," she said. Annette looked up. "It's Latin," Trudy said. "It means faithful, loyal to the point of danger." She paused. "My mother was into crosswords." Annette studied her for another moment, then she wrote it in. "Close enough," she said, and turned the page. The months that followed were not what Trudy expected, though she would have been hard-pressed to say what she had expected. She moved into a guest suite on the 3rd floor of the townhouse at Annette's insistence. "It's impractical to have you driving across the city at 2 in the morning when I can't find the bathroom," Annette had said with the blunt practicality that Trudy came to recognize as the older woman's version of warmth. She organized Annette's medications with the same system she had developed for her own mother. She learned which routes through the house Annette found comforting on difficult mornings, which topics anchored her, and which ones sent her searching. She learned to introduce the name of a person into a sentence casually, half a breath before Annette needed it, so the retrieval felt like memory rather than rescue. Declan paid her a salary that was frankly alarming. She argued with him about it once, and he looked at her with an expression of such absolute incomprehension that she stopped arguing. She saw him often. Not constantly. He traveled, and his work, such as it was, kept hours she did not inquire about, but often enough that she stopped being startled by him. He ate breakfast at home when he was in the city, usually quietly, usually with a newspaper, sometimes with his phone flat on the table beside him, and his jaw set in a particular way that meant something had gone wrong, somewhere she was not meant to know about. He asked about his mother every day, not in a performative way. He genuinely wanted to know, specifically, how she had slept, whether she'd been confused, whether she'd seemed happy. Trudy answered honestly, which was what he wanted and what most people in his life, she suspected, were not always willing to give him. She noticed other things too, which she did not intend to notice and tried, with limited success, to ignore. He had a way of entering a room that changed the pressure in it, not through loudness or display, through the specific gravity of a person who has carried real weight for a long time and stopped needing anyone to acknowledge it. He deferred to no one and was not unkind to anyone who did not require it. He laughed rarely, but when he did it was sudden and real, and briefly altered his face into something almost boyish. He treated his mother's illness with a fierce private grief that he would have been mortified to know was visible, and Trudy, who recognized grief in all its disguises, saw it anyway. She did not say any of this out loud to anyone. 4 months after she came to work at the townhouse, Trudy's own mother's cancer spread. She got the call on a Thursday morning while Annette was napping. She sat in the kitchen for 20 minutes with her phone in her hand before she trusted herself to move. When she stood up to go upstairs and check on Annette, Declan was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He had come home early. He looked at her face, and whatever he saw there made him stop moving. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine, Trudy." His voice had the same quality it had in the alcove at the Aldrin. Not loud, complete. She sat down. He made coffee. He sat across from her at the kitchen table and did not say anything, which was the right thing to do, and she cried without apology, which was not something she did in front of people, and he did not treat it as something that required a response or a solution. He just stayed. When she finished, she told him about her mother, the diagnosis progression, the cost of the next round of treatment, the fact that her mother's small house needed modifications it couldn't afford. Declan listened. He did not make promises in the moment, which she appreciated. But within a week, her mother's next round of treatment was covered. The house had a contractor scheduled, and a car service had been arranged to take Declan Mack to every appointment. Trudy went to him directly when she found out. "You can't do that," she said. "I did it, Declan. Your mother is sick. You take care of the people in this house. I take care of the people who do." He said it simply, with the same even tone he used for most things, as though this were obvious and the conversation were therefore concluded. I'm not asking for. I know you're not asking." He looked at her steadily. That's the point. She stood in his kitchen, full of an emotion she couldn't name cleanly, Gratitude and stubbornness, and something else underneath both of those things that she had been very carefully not naming for several months. "Why?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment. He had the look he sometimes got when he was deciding how much of something to put into words. "Because you showed up that night for a woman you didn't know, and you showed up every day after that, and you have never once, not once, made my mother feel less than herself." His voice was very quiet. "Do you understand how rare that is in my world, Trudy? People who just do the right thing, not because there's something in it for them, not because they're afraid, because it's the right thing." He paused. "My world is not full of that." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yours isn't either, I think," he said. It was true, and she didn't argue it, and they stood in the kitchen with the afternoon light going long across the tile and something between them that had been building for months and had finally run out of room. She did not leave the townhouse. Annette, who missed very little, even on bad days, noticed within approximately 48 hours and said nothing for 3 weeks, before informing Trudy over a crossword that she had always found it ridiculous when people were indirect about things that were obvious. "He looks at you," Annette said, filling in 6 across. "Mrs. Muro, he looked at Verity the way a person looks at a contract. He looks at you the way a person looks at something they're afraid of losing." She turned the page. "I'm not blind, Trudy. I'm forgetful. Those are different things." It was not a fairy tale, and Trudy would not have believed it if it had been. It was harder and stranger and more complicated than that. Declan Muro's world did not become safe because she entered it. The men who moved through his orbit remained what they were. The phone calls he took in other rooms at odd hours did not stop. She did not pretend she didn't know what he was, and he did not pretend to be something else, and that honesty, the plain, specific honesty of 2 people who had both lived long enough in difficult circumstances to have stopped seeing the point of pretending, was what she would later identify as the first real foundation of anything. She had walked into the Aldrin Hotel on a cold Thursday evening, carrying a tray of champagne, and left with a bruised cheek and a life she hadn't known she was about to step into. She had stepped in front of something meant to diminish an old woman in a green dress, and, in doing so, had fallen headlong into the only place in Declan Muro's carefully armored world that no one had ever thought to protect. The quiet, lamplit space where he was simply a son who was frightened and a man who was lonely, and where Trudy Mack, heavy and warm and relentlessly, incandescently decent, turned out to be exactly what fit.